Okay, ladies and gentlemen, my friends around the world, good evening, good afternoon, and Ramadan Kareem. I am very, very pleased that Professor or Sheikh Richard Taylor has accepted the invitation of the Foundation for Research in Philosophy and Sciences in Muslim context to give a lecture on a very sensitive issue like Ibn Rushd and Averroes, a question of more than a name. Richard Taylor is a professor of philosophy at Marquette University in Milwaukee since 1982 and current member of the De Wolf Mansion Center at the Catholic University of Leuven in Belgium. He works mainly in three areas of medieval philosophy: the early period of the circle of Al-Kindi, the classical rationalist period of Al-Farabi, Ibn Sina, and Ibn Rushd, and the influence of translated philosophical works in Latin among Christian theologians and philosophers of the 12th and 13th centuries, such as Thomas Aquinas and his master, Albert the Great. In 2009, with Professor Therese and Riyart, he published an English translation of Ibn Rushd's long commentary on the Anima of Aristotle, lost in Arabic. He is past president of the American Catholic Philosophical Association. He is currently vice-president of the Société Internationale de l'Histoire des Sciences et de la Philosophie Arabe et Islamique, and director of the Aquinas and the Arabs International Working Group. He is also editor of the Breport series, Philosophy in the Abrahamic Traditions in the Middle Ages. Finally, I should add that he is a member of the editorial board of the Journal of Philosophy and Sciences in Muslim Context, edited and published in Morocco. Today, Taylor will deal with the following topic: Ibn Rushd and Averroes, a question of more than a name. I will give you the floor in a while, but before that, I should say that I am happy also to receive many of our friends from the United States, Mexico, and Tunisia, and also from other countries. I will not translate, but I will say some words in Arabic just for our audience in Arabic. أصدقائي صديقاتي سيداتي سادتي، أنا سعيد جدا اليوم بأن أستضيف الأستاذ ريتشارد تايلور الذي يعني شرفنا باستجابته لدعوة المؤسسة، مؤسسة البحث في الفلسفة والعلوم في السياقات الإسلامية، بإلقاء محاضرة حول ابن رشد في أصله العربي وابن رشد في تلقيه اللاتيني، وأن المشكلة أكبر من مجرد التسمية. ريتشارد تايلور أستاذ الفلسفة منذ 1982 في جامعة ماركيت بويسكونسن، وهو أيضا عضو مركز بحثي بالجامعة الكاثوليكية بلوفن ببلجيكا. يشتغل أساسا حول الفلسفة العربية الإسلامية الكلاسيكية في مرحلتها الكلاسيكية، وخاصة حول ما يسمى بحلقة الكندي، كما يشتغل أيضا على المرحلة الكلاسيكية التي يعني أعضاؤها الأساس هم الفارابي، ابن سينا، وابن رشد. واهتمامه الثالث أو مجاله الثالث في الاشتغال هو التلقي اللاتيني من قبل الفلاسفة والتيولوجيين اللاتين لأعمال هؤلاء الفلاسفة المسلمين والعرب، وخاصة توما الأكويني وأستاذه ألبير الكبير. عمله الأساس الذي في الحقيقة سجل به تقدما كبيرا في الدراسات وهو ترجمته لنص الشرح الكبير لكتاب النفس من قبل ابن رشد المفقود في العربية، ترجمه إلى الإنجليزية من اللاتينية. ريتشارد تايلور عضو هيئات دولية عدة، منها عضو هيئة تحرير مجلتنا الفلسفة والعلوم في السياقات الإسلامية. اليوم سعيد جدا بأن استقبل ريتشارد تايلور ومعه مجموعة من الأصدقاء من الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية ومن بلجيكا ومن مكسيكو ومن تونس كما من المغرب. So هذا باختصار ما كنت أود أن أقوله بالعربية. So Richard, thank you for accepting my invitation. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Fuad. I very much appreciate the invitation, and it prompts me to work on a very interesting question. And the question is, as you put it to me originally, Ibn Rushd and Averroes was a question of more than a name, and this raises the issue of whether, in fact, there is an identity of doctrine between these two. The people bearing these two figures, and that's precisely what I'm addressing here with some new research that has not been available before. So let me proceed. In this presentation, I will address the question of whether there is more than a difference of name between Ibn Rushd of Cordoba and the Latin traditions of Averroes. In the short time I have, it is of course impossible to provide a comprehensive account. Hence, I will limit myself here to issues of philosophical teachings on the nature of human intellectual understanding and the afterlife. In what follows, I will show that one of the most influential thinkers of the medieval Latin tradition, Albert the Great, attributed to Averroes teachings radically different from those of Ibn Rushd. The difference between Ibn Rushd and Averroes is much more than that of a name. Rather, it is a very substantial difference of reasoned philosophical doctrine. I will address the issue of human intellectual understanding in the afterlife in several steps. First, I will consider at length the philosophical teachings of Ibn Rushd in his commentaries on Aristotle's De Anima and Metaphysics, on the issues of A, the separate material intellect. Why do you want to advance that? Thank you. Intellect and separate agent intellect, and B, the afterlife of human beings as personal and individual. Second, I will explain first Albert's mistaken account of Ibn Rushd's doctrine in his De Homine, written in 1242, and his rejection of that mistake in his Super Ethica, written in 1250-52. And second, Albert's much more consequential mistake in the Super Ethica in attributing to Averroes a novel doctrine of monopsychism, the notion that there is there being one soul for all human beings, something not found at all in the writings of Ibn Rushd. Third, I will conclude with a short summary and some comments. So I proceed. First, Ibn Rushd's commentaries on Aristotle's De Anima and Metaphysics. I should note, by the way, that I'm stressing here and focusing primarily on the philosophical works of Ibn Rushd. I'm not getting into other theological works or other forms of discussion, mostly concentrating on just these particular philosophical works and the Aristotelian tradition. So 1.1, Ibn Rushd on Aristotle's De Anima, the short and middle commentaries. Elsewhere, I've dealt with the issue of a post-mortem existence for human beings in 3 philosophical commentaries of Ibn Rushd on Aristotle's De Anima. So allow me to address this issue only briefly. In all of these commentaries, Ibn Rushd follows the common philosophical tradition and asserts the existence of the separate agent intellect as essential to the activities of intellectual abstraction and human knowing. But what about the material intellect in individual human beings? In the short commentary or epitome on the De Anima of Aristotle, Ibn Rushd crafts an intriguing account whereby what is called material intellect is in fact the disposition of the human imaginative power located in the brain, the physical brain. When the agent intellect becomes a formal actuating cause of intellectual understanding, quote, formed for us in the terminology borrowed from Alexander of Aphrodisias, it disposes images derived from the senses and formed in the imagination to be representative of an intelligible. However, these representations of intelligibles perish with the natural corruption of the power of imagination, which I indicated is based in the brain. That is, they cease to exist at human death of their subject. In his later middle commentary, Ibn Rushd rejects his earlier account and instead asserts that intelligibles abstracted from individual sensory experience by the agent intellect cannot be received into a bodily power, since this would particularize them or rob them of their universality. The subject must be a true intellect and truly immaterial, he reasons, because the intelligibles are immaterial. The material intellect on this account in the middle commentary is an intellect as an immaterial receptive power attached to and individuated by the embodied particular human soul to which it belongs. It is truly intellect. Yet this account entails that when the human perishes as composite of body and soul, so too its power of receptive material intellect perishes, since it received its individuation only through its relationship to a particular human body. Neither of these two commentaries on De Anima provides philosophical reasoning or statements in support of the persistent existence of an individual human soul or intellect after death. So 2.1, Ibn Rushd in the long commentary on Aristotle's De Anima. In his final account in the long commentary on the De Anima, Ibn Rushd sets out a much more complex science of human soul and intellect, again asserting the existence of the unique immaterial agent intellect, but now also asserting the existence of the unique material intellect shared by all human knowers. In doing so, he was embracing Aristotle's suggestion at De Anima 2.2 that, quote, intellect and the theoretical thinking power seem to be a different kind of soul, close quote, which, quote, alone can be separate in the way that the eternal is separate from the perishable, close quote. While Ibn Rushd asserts individual humans to have a special brain power of cogitation as, quote, a kind of reason, aliquar ratio, that works with the separate intellects in intellectual abstraction, this is not really an immaterial intellect, but rather a bodily power, which he also calls passible intellect, a power which perishes with the body. Still, humans, even though they are bodily entities, do, evidently enough for Ibn Rushd, have intellectual understanding through certain connections with the separate agent intellect and the separate material intellect. This activity of intellectual understanding in the human being he calls the, quote, theoretical intellect, close quote. This comes about when the human being confers the results of external senses and internal sense powers of the brain into memory. Intellectual understanding then comes about when the agent intellect casts its intellectual light upon this content in memory, such that what were intelligibles in potency are realized now in a new mode of being as imperishable and incorruptible intelligibles in act, in the receptive power of the material intellect. The material intellect then is realized as theoretical intellect, containing immaterially the intelligibles in act that constitute science. Given the fact that humans clearly manifest an activity of intellect, the theoretical intellect is considered by Ibn Rushd to be realized both in the eternal material intellect and in the perishable individual human knower. This theoretical intellect is eternal in the material intellect, yet it is present in human beings as venerable and corruptible, and that's a quotation from Ibn Rushd, as are the human beings in which it is present. Thus, the theoretical intelligibles in the material intellect are eternal, as is the human species, while individual humans and their activity of theoretical knowing are perishable and mortal, according to Ibn Rushd in his long commentary on the De Anima. It seems then that in his philosophical accounts, particularly his mature long commentary on the De Anima, his only work on De Anima known to the Latins, human fulfillment as knowers and happiness for Ibn Rushd can only be had by individual human beings in the present life, and that it is found in the attainment of intellectual understanding. No natural part of the human being is per se intellectual and thereby immaterial. The individual human soul is formed of the body, albeit with some kind of natural connection with the separate agent intellect and the separate material intellect, thanks to which the individual can share individually in the activities of those intellects during its mortal existence. This connection of the knowing perishable human individual with the separate agent and material intellects is described in his commentary on the Republic as a congenital power when he writes, quote, "The purpose of man, insofar as he is a natural being, is to ascend to the intelligibles of the theoretical sciences," close quote. When developed fully by mortal human individuals, this passable apprehension of theoretical intelligibles of science is ultimate fulfillment and happiness. But again, for mortal human beings, and that they do not live on in an afterlife. In sum, for Ibn Rushd in his long commentary on the De Anima, there is no philosophical doctrine of a post-mortem persistence of an individual's human soul, and also there is no doctrine of monopsychism. Rather, in this philosophical work, he holds, one, that the human soul is form of the body, and that intellect literally understood is not an intrinsic power of human soul, and two, that human intellectual understanding is to be explained by way of a linkage or conjunction with a unique, immaterially separate eternal agent intellect and a unique, immaterially separate eternal material intellect. Third, thus humans, by way of a natural disposition, are able to connect with those separate intellects during their lifetimes and to share in the intellectual fulfillment and excellence that constitutes happiness. These are the key philosophical parts of his epistemological account of the phenomenon of human scientific understanding of intelligibles on the part of perishable human souls. This sharing or participation of intelligible understanding takes place for learned human individuals only thanks to their own willed efforts, thanks to the involvement of the agent intellect by its immaterial power for abstraction, and thanks to the receptivity of the material intellect as an incorporeal subject in which abstracted intelligibles and act are made to exist. Hence, this joining with those transcendent intellects, something natural and proper to intellectually accomplished perishable human beings through their own willing activity, opens to humans intellectual access to all beings through knowledge. As Ibn Rushd characterizes it, quote, "In this way, therefore, human beings, as Themistius says, are made like unto God, in that he is all beings in a way, and one who knows these in a way. For beings are nothing but his knowledge, and the cause of beings is nothing but his knowledge. How marvelous is that order, and how mysterious is that mode of being," close quote. Ibn Rushd is clearly very enthusiastic on this. Next, 1.2. Ibn Rushd, in his long commentary on the Metaphysics, which was also translated into Latin, and then very importantly. In his long commentary on the Metaphysics at Book Lam, the Greek lambda, text 17, Ibn Rushd discusses the issue of the afterlife in commenting on Aristotle, Metaphysics 12, chapter 3, 1070a 24 to 27, where Aristotle says the following in the course of a critique of Plato's view. And this is Aristotle. Whether remains afterward, hysteron, is another question. In some cases, there is nothing to prevent this. For example, the soul may be of this nature. Not all of it, but the intelligent part, for presumably all of it cannot be. Close quote. For reasons which will become clear shortly, it's important to note that the Arabic text of Aristotle is rendered here by Charles Guénécon as follows. This is the Arabic rendered by Guénécon. "We must inquire whether anything can last in an afterlife, for in certain things there is nothing to prevent it. For instance, if the soul is in that situation, it is not the whole soul, but the intellect only. For the whole, it is perhaps impossible." That's the translation of Aristotle from Arabic. Although the Arabic text had bi-akhiratin, afterwards, or even hereafter, rather than bil-akhirati, in the afterlife, Guénécon's translation of the Arabic as in an afterlife, the preposition bit with the indefinite noun, is not unsuitable in precisely this particular context, since Aristotle himself makes mention of the issue of the soul afterwards, hysteron. Ibn Rushd then proceeds with a quotation from Alexander of Aphrodisias and an explanation that the latter view, his view, is different from that of others, namely Theophrastus, Themistius, and others, noting that, quote, most commentators think that the material intellect survives, close quote. This discussion is prompted by the reference to soul in Aristotle's text and the question of whether something remains, quote, remains afterward, close quote. Ibn Rushd explains that the teaching of Alexander, which is called the acquired intellect and comes from outside, this does not persist in its own existence. This intellect that comes from outside does persist in its own existence. The intellectual powers that come about in the individual human soul, however, quote, are both corruptible according to him, close quote. Ibn Rushd then continues, quote, this intellect is the one he intends when he says, quote, this intellect that is a faculty of the soul and is thought to be a part of it cannot survive either, close quote. Now that's Alexander explained by Ibn Rushd. In accord with what is found in his long commentary on the De Anima, Ibn Rushd now, in his long commentary on the Metaphysics, sets out his own teaching very different from that of Alexander. The ancient intellect is what brings about yaf'alu, the intelligibles by abstraction based ultimately on sensation, and sees to it that they are received into the material intellect, such that, quote, the intellect in potentiality, that is the material intellect, is to that intellect as it were a place, not a matter, close quote. Here he explains that the material intellect and the ancient intellect are distinct substances that come to unite, such that the act of the ancient intellect produces something that is part of the substance of the material intellect. That is, the immaterial ancient intellect produces the abstracted form, putting it into the place of the incorporeal material intellect, the locus of abstracted intelligibles in act. In this way, quote, something eternal, the material intellect, intellectually understands, yaqilu, what is subject to generation and corruption, close quote. Bringing his comments on this text of Aristotle to a close, Ibn Rushd reflects that when the material intellect reaches full realization of its potentiality for receiving intelligibles, this will be human perfection and highest happiness. Far from the condition of humankind in his day, Ibn Rushd hyperbolically imagines what would be the case were we to have attained all intelligibles through study of the world, such that there would no longer be need for sense perception or abstraction of sensible natures of the world, and we would be united to the fully actualized material intellect containing all intelligibles. Later, in the final section of his explication of Aristotle's Metaphysics, Book 12, Chapter 7, at 1020b, 14 to 16, Ibn Rushd again explicates the text in accord with his account in the long commentary on the De Anima. Aristotle writes, quote, such then is the first principle upon which depend the sensible universe and the world of nature, and its life is like the best which we temporarily enjoy. It must be in that state always, which is impossible for us. Now, Ibn Rushd in his Arabic version reads this, heaven and nature then are in agreement with such a principle. Heaven and nature then depend on it. Its sojourn is in accordance with that which is most excellent, which belongs to us for a short time, but for it is eternally so. When discussing this passage, however, Ibn Rushd chooses another translation. He writes, the other translation has, quote, it is on such a principle then that heaven and nature depend, and we enjoy something like a happy state for a short time, close quote. Now, I emphasize these two translations because both of them indicate that the human apprehension of fulfillment, or the human intellectual apprehension and fulfillment is but for a short time. But let me continue. Then, explaining the meaning of Aristotle, Aristotle's remarks, Ibn Rushd adds this. He means, it is evident that the heaven and nature are in contact with a principle which is an intellect in the highest state of pleasure, happiness, and bliss, similar to our own state of contact for a short time with the intellect, which is our principle. Now, it's important that we read this quotation in the context of the discussion of human intellectual understanding, hence the reference to the short time with the intellect, which is our principle. That separate intellect with which the heavens and nature are in contact is, of course, the unmoved mover, ultimately. In the case of a celestial body being in a state of intellectual apprehension of a separate principle, that state is without beginning or end. So, quote, this state belongs to it eternally, but for us it is not possible, close quote. For we humans, then, quote, our contact with the principle which is in us cannot be eternal, because that part of us which is united is subject to generation and corruption, close quote. And that's Ibn Rushd. Okay. Explaining this passage further, Ibn Rushd again reaches back to what he had set out in his long commentary on the De Anima. As there, here too, for Ibn Rushd, perishable human beings are able to share in intellectual understanding through contact with the separate agent intellect and separate material intellect, which together are principle and end for human beings. These intellects for human beings are like the, quote, the lover who moves the beloved, close quote, by entering from outside and bringing human knowers to their fulfillment. Together, so the lover in this sense are the separate intellects. Together, they constitute the principle through which the human fulfilling end of intellectual understanding takes place. Hence, the relation of a human being to these principles is like the relation of the receptive beloved to the actualizing lover. Human beings become fulfilled, or one might even say pregnant, with knowledge only thanks to the actuality of intellectual understanding brought about by the separate intellects, agent and material intellects. That is, this takes place through the realization of the theoretical intellect that I mentioned earlier in a human knower, which is also at the same moment the realized theoretical intellect in the unique and shared eternal material intellect. Ibn Rushd, in his commentary on Aristotle's Metaphysics, Book Lambda, or Lam in the Arabic, in this passage in Book 12, or 11 for the Arabic, Chapter 7, the discussion is of human knowing, not the finality of the metaphysics of the unmoved mover. That's a different issue. So one can be confused a bit by this image of beloved and lover, thinking that in fact it's a reference to the unmoved mover primarily, but it's not. Here it's an epistemological context. So in accord with this contextual understanding, two important considerations have to be made clear. First, Gennekon's translation as the beloved moves the lover requires correction. The Arabic text itself draws on the notion of how the lover moves the beloved. Yakhrihu al-ashik al-ma'shuk. The corrected translation then is as follows. Aristotle thinks that happiness for men, qua men, consists in this contact with the intellect, which has been shown in De Anima to be principle, mover, and agent for us. The separate intellect, qua separate, must be principle of that of which they are principle in both senses. I mean as movers and ends. The agent intellect, insofar as it is separate and principle for us, must move us in the same way as the lover moves the beloved. And if every motion must be in contact with the thing which produces it as end, we must ultimately be in contact with this separate intellect, so that we depend on such a principle, on which the heavens depends, as Aristotle says, although this happens for us, but for a short time, close quote. Second point I want to draw your attention to is this. As noted earlier, Gennekon rendered the Arabic biakhiratan as in the afterlife at Book 12, Chapter 3, as we saw earlier. In the passage just above, Gennekon chooses to render the Arabic phrase as ultimately, a contextual extension of the literal afterwards or hereafter. These renderings of the Arabic bihitatin are each not objectionable in their contexts. Yet, as we will see below, the Latin translation of each as in postremo had very significant consequences for the Latin tradition. This is because Albertus Magnus chose to understand the meaning of the Latin phrase as in the afterlife or in the hereafter, and as a consequence attributed to Averroes a doctrine of human afterlife not found in philosophical writings of Ibn Rushd. So the problem is not the translation, the problem is the meaning of the translation. And it's also a grammatical difficulty as well, which we'll see, because the Latin does not have a definite article, while Arabic does. So a conclusion on the teachings of Ibn Rushd. In sum, Ibn Rushd's philosophical accounts of human beings in all three of his commentaries on the De Anima of Aristotle and in his commentary on the Metaphysics of Aristotle set out consistent teachings on the mortal nature of human beings without any doctrine of post-mortem existence for individual human souls, though he does hold for the eternity of the species through the generation of individual humans. In these two mature commentaries, he teaches that the human soul is form of the body and is perishable with the body. Human beings are essentially composite mortal hylomorphic entities, distinguished among sublunar animals by a natural end and disposition for attaining intellectual understanding through linking with the separate agent intellect and separate material intellect by way of a functional presence of those substantially separate intellects somehow in the soul. And he uses that phrase quite often, in the soul. For Ibn Rushd, the power of intellect is not something that belongs to human beings per se, but rather is something per se present only in transcendent intellects, including the agent intellect and the receptive material intellect. Now, we turn to Albert. Albert the Great and his mistaken interpretations. First, point one, Albert's De Homine and his misunderstanding of separate intellects. Albert provides a detailed account in his De Homine, again written about 1242, of how he concocted a theory explaining that the agent intellect and the receptive intellect are powers of the individual human soul. This he does by quoting with precision long parts of the Latin text of the De Anima of Ibn Sina, Avicenna, and also long quotations from the long commentary on the De Anima of Aristotle of Ibn Rushd, that is Averroes, and weaving from these his own understanding. Ibn Rushd held that the human rational soul is an intellectual, receptive, immaterial, and eternal a parte post entity, distinct from the body and the senses. The human rational soul uses the body and its senses in the fashion of a tool and connects with the agent intellect, a unique, eternal, separate substance, to bring to perfection or completion human intellectual understanding. Ibn Rushd taught that the human soul is form of the body and dependent for human scientific knowledge on sensation, and also on some sort of natural relationship with the separate agent intellect and the separate receptive material intellect. As I show in my 2018 article, Albert rejected Avicenna's conception of the human rational soul, requiring a necessary connection to the agent intellect separate in substance and replete with forms from which the world derived. He rejected that. Regarding Averroes, however, the account of Albert is more complex. In Albert's time, there were two competing conceptions of the thought of Averroes, one largely in accord with the genuine teachings of Ibn Rushd, and another in which it was contended that the agent intellect and the receptive material intellect are two immaterial, that is, unextended and incorporeal, powers of the rational soul. Albert in his De Homine is well aware of these two interpretations, and he chooses to reject the genuine teaching of Ibn Rushd, instead asserting that the proper understanding of Averroes is that the agent intellect and the material intellect are powers of the individual human soul and present in the soul. All natural knowledge comes through the senses, and intelligible species are abstracted from the content of external and internal senses by the power of agent intellect and received into the soul as intelligibles in act in the power of the receptive possible intellect, according to Albert's own account of Averroes. In his developed concoction, which he attributed to Averroes, Albert crafted an account which, although based on a misunderstanding of the genuine teaching of Ibn Rushd, was in fact of momentous importance for the future teachings of his student Thomas Aquinas, who largely made it his own. One should note that immediately prior to his initiating his commentary on the sentences at Paris in 1252, Thomas was assigned as assistant to Albert at Cologne, since the two arrived there in 1248. There in 1250 to 52, with Thomas still present with him, Albert completed the first Latin commentary on the Nicomachean Ethics, his Super Ethica. By the time of this work, Albert had realized his earlier mistake regarding the teachings of Averroes, and now set out a very different account. That is, Albert had made a mistake in 1242, and then about a decade later gave witness to his having come to realize his mistake in the interim. We don't know exactly when this, but the Super Ethica gives us evidence that he realized his mistake. Yet his correction and what follows from it for Albert and for his student Thomas, who followed Albert in Albert's lead in this, included yet another much more consequential mistake. This connection with Thomas, I'll be glad to just explain more fully in the discussion period. So I move on now to Albert's Super Ethica and his mistaken attribution of monopsychism to Averroes. In his new analysis, or mistaken with regard to Ibn Rushd, but he attributes it to this character Averroes. In his new analysis of Averroes on human soul in the Super Ethica, Albert presents what he understands to be the doctrine of monopsychism, a teaching, again, radically different from that of Ibn Rushd. Monopsychism is the teaching that there is one soul in which all human beings share. The term monopsychism, as Alain de Libre has mentioned and others have mentioned, occurs for the first time in Leibniz. But that's not our concern. Our concern is with the meaning of the notion, that is, of a single soul. The first step in Albert's attribution of monopsychism to Averroes is in his assertion of a post-mortem existence of human soul. This Albert thought he had found in Averroes' long commentary on the metaphysics in passages we've already examined when considering the teaching of Ibn Rushd. As we've seen, the Arabic biachidatin, afterwards or even hereafter, is found in Averroes' long commentary on the metaphysics at 1070, A2427. I'll repeat the translation here. We must inquire whether anything can last afterwards. The Arabic biachidatin, the Latin in postremo. And this is significant. For in certain things, there is nothing to prevent it. For instance, if the soul is that in that situation, it is not the whole soul, but the intellect only. For the whole it is perhaps impossible. In this context, the Arabic biachidatin and the Latin in postremo happen to refer to a conception of the afterlife or the hereafter of the human soul. It genuinely does in that context. In the second case we examined, however, the phrase did not refer to the afterlife. And this is it. This is the text again. Quote, the agent intellect, insofar as it is a separate principle for us, must move us in the same way as the lover moves the beloved. And if every motion must be in contact with the thing which produces it as end, we must ultimately, biachidatin, or Latin in postremo, be in contact with this separate intellect so that we depend on such a principle. Close quote. As indicated earlier, in this context, the indefinite Arabic phrase, biachidatin, clearly is not a reference to the hereafter or the afterlife. Rather, the sense here is that of the mortal human fulfillment or happiness, is that mortal human fulfillment or happiness must ultimately, or we might say inevitably, be in contact with separate intellect. Latin, however, lacks the definite article, such that in postremo may well be rendered as an adverbial phrase later on, ultimately, inevitably, or even in the afterlife or in the hereafter. Because of the lack of the definite article, there's a significant difference. The Latin translation is not wrong here, but the reading of the text in Latin can be an incorrect interpretation. Rather than reading it as we have it in the Arabic, Albert read in postremo as meaning in the afterlife or in the hereafter, thereby understanding that Averroes in his philosophical accounts held for an afterlife of the individual human soul in some fashion. Of course, in the context of Arabic discussions of Ibn Rushd, who does not hold for post-mortem existence of human soul, such an understanding by Albert makes no sense whatsoever. But with the Latin in postremo, the notion of the need for a post-mortem contact with separate intellectual substance is not an impossible interpretation. And this is the interpretation of Albert. The second step is the linking of the afterlife with ultimate happiness or fulfillment. Early in his Super Ethica, Albert remarks that Averroes in his commentary on De Anima explains, on the basis of the authority of Aristotle, that there is only one soul for all human beings, which is contrary to the Christian faith. Later, in the same work, the Super Ethica, Albert writes regarding the view that after death, the human intellect is linked to separate intellects, and after quoting Averroes, and then he explains, quote, in this way, it seems that in death, the rational soul is separated from other powers and remains only conjoined to the intelligence or intellect. Further, Albert states that ultimate fulfillment or happiness, ultima prosperitas in the Latin, according to Averroes in the 11th book of the Metaphysics, that's our LAM or lambda, is that, quote, this is Albert, our soul be conjoined or linked to active intellect in our souls, close quote. The text to which Albert here refers is the second of Ibn Rushd, which we examined earlier. In reading that text, Albert understood the Latin in postremo to mean in the afterlife. That interpretation is then linked by Albert to the notion of ultimate happiness in Averroes. Now, Albert sets out his interpretation of Averroes in the solutio of his discussion. This is his own view now. It should be said that the error of some of the Arabs was that our intellect does not remain in existence according to being after death, but only according to essence. They said in this way that it remains in the 10th intelligence from which it flows. And in this way, there remains only one soul. That's my emphasis, only one soul. When the resultant individuation of the soul is based on the separation from body, which was its own, there will remain only one common thing. But this is heresy. Now, this is the doctrine of monopsychism. Albert then goes on, then also adds later that if one were to maintain this heretical teaching, one would say that our fulfillment and happiness, prosperitas nostra, will be in the conjoining or linking to the intellect, to this intellect, not in being, but as something known. Quote, when the soul after death will contemplate simple quiddities as by intellect, close quote. With this interpretation of Averroes, Albert has completed his own version of the crafting of a doctrine of Latin Averroism, one not found in the writings of Ibn Rushd. This is the teaching of monopsychism, of one essential soul to which all individual human souls return in post-mortem unity. This second misinterpretation of texts in the Latin translations of the work by Ibn Rushd by Albert contributed to the formation of a doctrine of monopsychism, which later came to be an essential part of further developments of Averroism. This doctrine was set out in Albert's Super Ethica, composed in 1250 to 52, while his student Thomas Aquinas was his assistant in Cologne. Hence, it's not surprising to find that young Thomas, using what he had learned in Cologne in his writing of his commentary on the sentences in Paris, immediately following his time in Cologne. Albert's interpretation is reflected in the title of Thomas's Natural Epistemology in his commentary on the sentences at Book 2, Distinction 17, Question 2, Article 1. Quote, whether there is one soul or intellect for all human beings. This indicates he was following Albert, at least in part. with Albert's account, and also with Albert's account of Averroes' monopsychism, also set out by Aquinas and his commentary in the sentences, Book 2, Distinction 19, Question 1, Article 1, where he gives an extensive account of the monopsychism of Averroes. So, a brief conclusion. Albert's mistaken interpretation of Averroes in De Homine had the happy and valuable consequence of providing Thomas Aquinas with a clear account of agent intellect and receptive material intellect as powers of the soul, which Thomas could draw upon and adapt in his own teaching on the nature of human knowing and the unity of the human person. So it's very valuable for that. Albert's second set of mistaken interpretation, which asserted that Averroes held for the post-mortem existence of the essence of the human soul, and for ultimate human happiness in knowing separate substances in the hereafter, had less happy consequences. This is the case since from those mistakes, Albert went on to craft a foundation for a more developed Latin Averroism, which both Thomas and Albert later attacked in detail. It's a phantom that Albert created, and both of them had to attack it. On the basis of the analysis of text and doctrine I provided here today, it's clear that the differences between the teachings of Ibn Rushd and those of the Latins Averroes are far more than merely that of a name. Rather, in the case of human intellect, they're very different and wholly incompatible. So, Fouad, thank you very much for prompting me to put this together.
Thank you so much for this highly interesting and sophisticated lecture. I'm really happy to listen to it. Now, time for some discussion. With us, Muqdad Arfa and Therese. Who else? Okay, and Charles. And then Luis.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. So what do you think, our friends? Charles, Therese. Okay, let's remove the...
There's everyone. Okay.
Okay.
A small but distinguished group. Thank you for the time it took you to listen to all of this.
Yes.
You're more than welcome.
Yeah. It seems that, the question is more complicated than just, Averroes and Ibn Rushd. So we are talking about two doctrines rather than two names. Okay. So what do you think? Therese? Yes, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Fouad, and thank you, Richard, for a very interesting and clear presentation. I was wondering a bit, do you think that what Albert says is really based on an intention to interpret the text as he has it, or that is a bit wanting to put an opposition to his own view and therefore misinterpret the text? So is it an intentional mistake up to a point?
Well, this is a very complex question, really a wonderful question as well. First of all, with regard to the De Homine, which he writes in 1242, I think he genuinely makes a mistake. And at the time, there were two interpretations of Averroes. The names that people many years ago have given, these are first and second Averroism. But first and second are not proper denominations of these. They're just two different interpretations of a complex text. And it's very clear to me that Albert made a mistake in that. Nevertheless, the mistake he made, now behind this, there are other people who are reading Averroes as well. in this. And Alain de Libre has done a very nice job of talking about this, and he's in some of my footnotes as well. But de Libre stresses the importance of Al-Farabi in the context of the early Latins, and while Al-Farabi and also Alexander. And we sometimes perhaps don't think of them because Al-Farabi is not very seldom cited at all by Aquinas, and although Albert will cite him. But the Farabian part they were very excited about because they had a translation of the Risala fil Aql. Mm-hmm. In the translation of the Risala fil Aql, ultimate human happiness is to transcend the body, leave the body behind in knowledge, and to receive fulfillment in the afterlife of knowledge, in not bonding with, but at the level of the agent intellect. It's Ibn Bajjah who said something about bonding with the agent intellect. That's another issue. But what happened, this is really quite fascinating. That notion of Ibn Bajjah of joining with the agent intellect is discussed in, as you know, of course, Therese, it's in the long commentary in the Dhyana by Ibn Rushd. But to the Latins, this was very important because it helped them further interpret Al-Farabi in the notion that conjoining. So Al-Farabi didn't explain it all. Al-Farabi doesn't say we rise up and we conjoin with separate substances and that sort of thing, but we rise up to the level of understanding or something close to it for the agent intellect. But when you combine that with the text of Ibn Bajjah and his interpretation, then ultimate happiness is rising up to bond with the higher intellect and then know separate substances through that. De Libre does a lovely job in his Métaphysique et Noétique Abré le Grand. A lovely job explaining the importance of Al-Farabi behind the way the Latins were trying to interpret Ibn Rushd, and Al-Farabi as well, of course. So I think in the case of the De Homine, then it's a genuine mistake, well grounded in ambiguous texts of Ibn Rushd. In Anima Nostra occurs again and again, and so they took it literally. These intellects are in Anima Nostra, but Ibn Rushd said no, they're separate substances. So so I think in the first, there's a genuine mistake by Albert. He clearly gives evidence of having remedied that in some of his other condemnations in the Super Ethica. And we don't know, I can't find another text of Albert between 1242 and 1250 where he corrects himself. But that was also a time when the Latins were coming to understand Ibn Rushd. Averroes better. The second, though, the reason I mentioned the Al-Farabi and the Ibn Bajjah is I think that helped to lead Albert into, in the Super Ethica, that and the misunderstanding of in postremo. I think that just that little phrase is extremely important, I think. And Albert is on it. He knows the importance of that. That then, those paved the way for this new interpretation. So I don't think he's just setting it up as someone to battle with. I think he now thinks he has the genuine way to understand Averroes in the context of the generally Arab, so to speak, noetics put all together. So I think he's not. I don't think he's being disingenuous in that. But your question, right on track, and thank you very much for it.
Thank you, Therese.
Charles, you're about to.
So, Charles, please. Yes.
Thanks very much, Richard. Just very shortly, the way you answered Therese's question goes back to the doubts that I raised when I spoke to this group, and that you replied with a series of articles that would help me. The doubt being, what is not a doubt of the question being, how in the world did Al-Farabi get to the active intellect in his treatise on the intellect when there was no textual reason to go there? And I appreciate very much the text that you sent me, but perhaps your evocation here of Al-Farabi might help us. I had something else I also wanted to ask you about. I don't understand the correction that you made to je n'ai qu'un. What is this issue of yahriku al-ashiq al-ma'shuq? And
normally يحرك, I guess.
يحرك, yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Sorry.
يحرك.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
I missed the show.
He meant يحرك, just not يحرق, to burn.
Yeah.
Which means something else.
Yeah. No, that I understand.
Right. Thank you.
But what was the correction that you made?
Well, in the translation of Genekon, in the original translation of Genekon, he says that the beloved moves the lover. And that's what we often say is the interpretation of the unmoved mover. The beloved moves the lover through final causality. But in fact, the Arabic says the lover moves the beloved. And so with regard to intellectual understanding by individual human beings, the lover, which is the separate intellect, comes to be in the beloved. And as I use the image also of pregnancy, in the sense that and Aristotle talks about this as well, the intellect coming from the outside. So I'm saying that Genekon perhaps was caught up in thinking about the unmoved mover, rather than reading exactly what's there in this. The Latin for this is extremely ambiguous. Of course, in Latin, word placement doesn't follow the same order as well. And the Latin has, which is very unhelpful, has ut amens amatum. leaves out the verb. And so the Arabic is clearer than the Latin anyway. But thanks for the correction too. So sorry about that.
Yes, no problem. Charles?
Your audio's off, Charles.
And we have some Arabs among us.
Can you repeat your question? Yes.
There's an audio delay of some kind.
Because we have some
we're experiencing some kind of. Oh, there you are.
Not
okay.
on?
Try again. No, we're having some kind of delay as well. So. Okay.
Is that better?
Okay,
you hear me
good.
now? No.
Go ahead. Yes, please. Yes, go ahead.
I hear you now. No, there's some kind of delay between the audio and the video, Fuad.
Oh.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
No.
Yes.
Yes.
The mover is moving me away.
Good. Good.
You can hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, now. Technology is great when it's great.
Go ahead, Charles. Something is going wrong. I mean, I don't know what's exactly the problem, but we cannot hear you.
I'm trying.
Yeah, that's it. That's good.
Is it working?
Just keep
talking.
Keep talking then.
Is it on your end or on my end?
Okay.
Yes, okay.
Carry on.
There's some kind of delay between the video and the audio.
Okay, good. We can come back to Charles if you want, or we can just wait for a while. I mean,
well, I'll speak a little bit. I think let me say that I found it really quite fascinating that this little mistake in that Arabic phrase in the translation. The translation by Michael Scott is perfectly correct, except Latin can't distinguish the way that Arabic can. You can say in Arabic quite directly, bilahidati, and you know what you mean. But the Latin in postremo goes both ways. Even if, and also Latin can also use, I was looking at Albert's commentary on the metaphysics, and he will also use posterius later on in that sense too. So he understands, because of the context in which Albert is working, which, as I said, Delibra spells out very well in his book on Albert. Because of that context, Albert is insisting that there has to be an afterlife. And Albert is mixing a bit of Avicenna and Averroes to come to this notion that there is one soul. He has the idea from Avicenna that we return to the ancient intellect in some fashion. But of course, for Avicenna, we don't lose our identity, most Avicenna anyway, we don't lose our identity in that, but rather perhaps together with the ancient intellect, we contemplate the divine in some higher fashion, in some way. But and so Albert seems to be combining that in some way with a kind of Platonic notion also that there's one essence of human soul. It's really quite fascinating what he does. So that the human soul, the individual dies, then the soul no longer has a principle of individuation, the body. So it flies up, so to speak, and reunites with soul. And then that soul is the doctrine of monopsychism.
So usually, I mean, in Arabic, in Averroes' text, in Ibn Rushd's text. Okay, Charles, please go ahead.
Is my microphone working now? No.
Yes.
Yeah, it is working. Very good. It's what I was trying to ask. This, I understand the difficulty in Latin, but could we possibly be victims of a textual misreading? Wouldn't Averroes simply be trying to say, in the end?
Yeah.
Oh yes, I agree. I agree, but I'm saying that the key mistake.
It's that simple.
Even Rushd could be saying that. But the question is, once it's translated into Latin with in postremo, or even by posterius, what does Albert see? And Michael Scott's translation is perfectly correct. If it's biahiditin, in postremo. If it's bilahiditi, in postremo. So it's not a problem of translation. It's a problem of meaning in the context. So that's why I was so careful in the context to talk about Genekon, because Genekon is not incorrect, but one has to be very careful in the context. The incorrectness comes then in the context of Albert reading it in Latin, and Albert reading it with the predispositions of those who thought about the importance of Al-Farabi, as I mentioned, that Delibra so nicely spells out in his book. So Al-Farabi, even though Al-Farabi plays an enormous role in the interpretation of Arabic texts and Latin translation, far beyond what one might expect, given the paucity of works of Al-Farabi made available. But as again I say, I give much to Alain Delibra in his Métaphysique et Noétique Abraham le Grand for helping understand this.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So, Luis Muqtad, what do you think? I mean, go ahead, Luis, please.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Fuad. Thank you, Richard. This was very, very illuminating. It is very clear for me now that in the Superethica, Albert is correcting, as you were explaining, his interpretation of Ibn Rushd. But I'm always very surprised when reading the commentary on the Anima by Albert. Well, not commentary, he's the Anima. And we had a chance to discuss this because when he's criticizing Avicenna and Ibn Bajjah in this De Anima, he recurs to Averroes, and he insists frequently that he agrees with Averroes, and it seems that he suggests that he thinks that the material and the agent intellect are separated. And so it's a little bit confusing sometimes to read Albert, isn't it? Because he's always insisting that he agrees with Averroes, and now that one can see that in the Homine he says something and then he changes his mind, it is not clear enough in which sense he agrees with Averroes and in which sense he disagrees with Averroes. So can you tell us something about his position? Is he a sort of Averroist in some sense, or at the same time he's criticizing Averroes?
Okay, I think now I know we had extensive discussions of this, right? And read some wonderful texts together too.
Yes,
and thanks to the internet, right?
Mm-hmm.
But so I think that what Albert likes about Averroes is that the intellects are separate. Now, what do we mean by the intellects? The intellect is a power of the human soul, and the human these powers are separate from body. I think that's how you and I were talking about it some time ago. So one has to be careful when you say separate. It could be a separately existing substance, or it could be separate from body. So the powers, so the human soul for Albert is it brings actuality to the body, but together with its powers of possible intellect and active intellect or agent intellect, then it is immaterial. And so that's in accordance with Christian doctrine then too, and not the same, but in the same area as Thomas will do in some sense. So those are immaterial in this sense. So that's why he sort of likes what Averroes is doing in this kind of interpretation, this kind of thing. The idea that these powers have to be separate. They cannot be corporeal. That's what I'm after. Is that what you had?
Yeah, sure. But he's using separate then in a different sense from Averroes.
Yes, right. Quite so.
So, Richard, I mean, Joseph Puch is trying to join us, but I don't know what is the problem. But I mean, he sent a short comment saying that in postremo, last for all is exactly بآخرة.
Yes.
I mean, yeah, that was his comment, and I read it.
Sure.
Thanks. So, Muqdad.
That's not an argument. That's not an issue. The issue is, what did Albert see it as?
Yeah.
Quite important. Yeah. Luis, I want to go back briefly, though. You were referring to what Albert says in his De Anima.
Right.
This is a very, as you've seen already, this is pretty complex, what's going on. And I do not want to venture beyond the Superethica. That can be for another time. And what's interesting to stop with the Superethica in around 1250 is that you can see parts of what Albert says in the Superethica to show up in Aquinas' commentary in the sentences.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to go beyond that, because once I could go beyond it, and get into the De Anima, many more things happen.
Right.
So, I'm going to put, when this is published, I'm going to put a restriction there. No, I'm limiting myself to this early period. We can talk about it later, Albert, some other time, because it's just too much.
Yeah, of course, it's too much on the Anima. It's a very complicated text, but I think it's interesting to see what he's doing with Averroes the whole time in the later texts, and and whether he keeps the same position he discovers in the Superethic, as you were saying. Yeah.
Oh, it's very interesting.
So, Muqdad, do you have? Go ahead, please. You can speak use French or English as you want, but just put on your microphone, please. Your microphone, please, Muqdad.
Ça va. Merci beaucoup pour cette conférence. Vraiment, bravo. J'ai beaucoup appris. En fait, آخرة بآخرة أو بآخرة. J'arrive pas comment écrire. C'est-à-dire, comme on dirait, somme toute. C'est-à-dire, en fin d'analyse. On a dit des choses, on a développé des choses, mais à la fin, c'est cela.
Ouais.
C'est-à-dire quelque chose de postérieur et d'antérieur par opposé à ce qui est antérieur. Donc, peut-être how do you read it, please?
Does it have to, well, I read it as I indicated, akhiratan. Akhiratan?
No.
I can check my grammar again, but what the text has is akhiratan. We have the text of the metaphysics. We have the Arabic text of the metaphysics. So that's what he has in those passages in the Bouygues edition of the text. That's all I can say on that.
I mean, in Arabic, you can also use أخرة, which means, I mean, finally, ultimately, at the end. I mean, it's the same, but not بآخرة, since maybe you will be confused with the afterlife, الآخرة, which is something, I mean, totally different from the first one. بأخرة. That's exactly, I guess, the meaning, I mean, used by, or the word used by Ibn Rushd in his texts, in his metaphysics, in his long commentary on metaphysics. Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm checking the text.
Yeah.
I'm checking the.
Just tell me the page, and then we can check together.
I have the.
Yeah.
I'm going to find it's in the notes here, so I have to find a note for it. The page in Bouygues. 12, it's in Bouygues, 1612, 1612. 1612. Just a moment, I put the text here too.
1012?
1612.
Okay. Yes.
and 12 to 13. So
This is 16, 12. That's it. Which line do you have? Line? Okay.
Just a moment. I didn't
yes.
underline.
Yeah, but 16, 13. 16, 13, the second line.
Tu peux montrer le texte, une partie du texte.
Oui. تفسير ما بعد الطبيعة 1613. But I mean, it's not vocalized, so you cannot.
Il y a des variantes.
No, it's not vocalized. It's just written باخرة. There is no hamza. I mean, there is no hamza, so you can read it بآخرة. But I mean, in Arabic, classical Arabic, I mean, maybe the most, the closest, reading is just بأخرة. Means at the end, or and finally or ultimately. That's the meaning. I mean, فواجب أن نتصل بأخرة بهذا العقل. It means that it will be necessary. To join ultimately this. Separate intellect. That's the suggestion.
Right. So the question would be: Is it to be read as in the afterlife, or just ultimately? And then the point is that Albert read it as in the afterlife, and that had massive impact on Albert's reading and understanding of Averroes, of this character called Averroes.
It's just a general comment. There's no room to read. To understand it in the afterlife in Arabic, because we cannot say بآخرة in an afterlife. If in English, in an afterlife. If Ibn Rushd, wrote in an afterlife, it may mean that there are many afterlives. Because he usually use in the afterlife. بالآخرة, بالحياة الآخرة. That's the.
Right. So that's why I brought up the first quotation from Genekon, the first understanding. He then renders it in an afterlife.
Yeah.
Now that's not impossible given the context. It doesn't seem impossible to have that kind of meaning in the context of Aristotle talking about the soul and Plato. Nevertheless, I prefer just I don't prefer that, but that's not impossible. Not altogether impossible.
Juste un mot.
Vas-y.
Il y a Akhara certainement par opposition à Qadama. Quelque chose qu'on a dit avant.
Oui.
Au niveau de la racine, c'est par opposition à Qadama, comme Taqaddama. Pour comprendre le concept, je pense. Peut-être بأخرة, je vais vérifier. Mais en opposition de ce qui est antérieurement. Merci.
Mais de rien. Merci à toi. Merci encore,
Charles. Richard.
Yeah. So, Richard, it seems that we deal with many histories of many misunderstandings and misinterpretations. So, and I don't know whether we are clarifying these misunderstandings or we are adding, new misunderstanding to
I don't agree.
I don't know.
I think this is a clue as to the real foundations for Averroism.
Yeah,
and I think it gives us good reason to say, which in a different way, Ibn Rushd is not identical with Averroes.
Yeah.
In the doctrines. Now, notice, I want to mention, though, the elephant in the room. You know that phrase, the elephant in the room, which is, what did Ibn Rushd really think about the afterlife? And that's not my question. I don't want that question. Not now. Not in this. That's why I kept saying, in the philosophical works, in these philosophical works. That's of course a religious and political and much more complicated question for another day.
And I mean,
I spoke to that in our summer seminars. I spoke to something of that issue too. So
yeah.
But thank you very much for
thank you
your time and
mais les erreurs sont fécondes. Sont riches les erreurs. Merci.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much for this. I mean, for this debate, for this lecture. I mean, I was very happy. I'm very happy to see you as friends and colleagues. I mean, we are, I mean, almost, I mean, a family, a small group from, I mean, different countries. Maybe I can say see you soon in Paris, perhaps, inshallah. And I mean, wishing you happy life and happy days. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you, Richard, for your text.
Ramadan Mubarak.
Thank you. Thanks.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Everyone, thank you very much.
Bye. Bye, Therese, Charles.
Bye-bye.
Hi, Charles.
No, I'm trying to leave now.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
See you soon. Bye-bye, Therese. Bye-bye, Therese.
Bye-bye, Therese. Thank you, Fuad. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye. I see. Stop.
Okay. Just leave the studio. Yes. Hi, Simukhdad.
Hi. Thank you very much.
Tu vois? Ok.
Mais une erreur, c'est que